Hey guys, welcome back. Go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe grab a cup of tea that you'll forget to drink halfway through and settle in. Tonight, we're taking a slow, quiet float through one of history's most confusing disappearing acts. A civilization that built massive pyramids, calculated time like cosmic accountants, and then, one day, collectively said, "You know what? We're done," and wandered off, like someone leaving a group chat without explanation. Yes, tonight we begin with the mysterious, overly dramatic, and slightly passive-aggressive disappearance of the Maya civilization. And don't worry, this won't be a dramatic, ancient apocalypse documentary. No aliens, no curses, just humans being humans on a very grand scale. So, take a breath. Let the soundtrack in your head turn into a soft hum, and let's drift back, slowly, to the rainforests of Central America, where stones crumble, vines wrap around temples, and the humidity is so thick it feels like you're breathing warm soup. Drifting into the early Maya world. Long before the classic Maya cities rose, long before the big pyramids, fancy stelae, and kings with names like Sky Claw Serpent who eats the sun, the Maya were just small farming communities, scattered across jungles, swamps, and highlands. It wasn't glamorous. No gold, no giant monuments, just corn. So much corn. Maize wasn't simply food. It was the Beyoncé of early Maya civilization. Their myths said humans were literally made out of corn dough, which honestly explains a lot about human softness and questionable decision-making. These early communities started forming around 2000 BCE. Picture simple huts, quiet evenings, and people casually inventing math without knowing they were doing something that would torment school children thousands of years later. The Maya were patient builders. They did things very slowly, which makes it all the more ironic that later historians talk about their sudden collapse. No civilization that takes 600 years to perfect a calendar is really doing anything suddenly. But anyway, in these early days, the Maya were figuring themselves out. What gods to worship, which crops to grow, how many feathers a dignified headdress needs before it becomes a bit much. But the seeds, literally and metaphorically, were planted. Floating into the classic period. Now let's drift forward. The air gets heavier. The cities get taller. The rulers get stranger. We're entering what historians dramatically call the classic Maya period, roughly from 250 CE to 900 CE. This is the era everyone thinks of. Giant stepped pyramids, kings posing on monuments like ancient influencers, astronomer priests squinting at the stars with "I know something you don't" energy. And at the center of it all, city-states. Dozens of them. Because the Maya, for all their brilliance, apparently never looked at the concept of political unity and said, "Hey, that seems convenient." Nope. Instead, they created a landscape full of competitive, grumpy little kingdoms, each with its own ruler, its own ego, and its own obsession with showing up the neighbors. Some of the big ones include Tikal, the overachieving city with towers so tall they literally break the jungle canopy. Calakmul, Tikal's eternal rival, basically the "if you succeed, I succeed harder" school of diplomacy. Palenque, home of fancy architecture and rulers with names like Pakal the Great, who wasn't shy about commissioning monuments declaring how great he was. Copan, a city that loved elaborate sculptures of kings who looked vaguely stressed. These cities didn't form an empire. They formed a kind of history-messy friend group. All alliances, betrayals, petty arguments, and gift-giving ceremonies no one actually wanted to attend. But despite the social chaos, the Maya produced some of the most sophisticated achievements in the ancient world. Let's drift through them gently, like wandering through an ancient museum where the air conditioning is always a little too cold. Mathematics. The Maya created a base 20 numerical system, because fingers and toes, obviously. They also invented zero, which most ancient civilizations treated like a weird imaginary friend. Astronomy. Maya astronomers tracked Venus, the sun, the moon, and eclipses with such accuracy that modern astronomers occasionally double-check their own math like, wait, were they this good? Writing. They had a fully developed hieroglyphic writing system. Beautiful, complicated, and almost impossible to decipher without sacrificing your sanity. Architecture. Their cities were stone playgrounds, ball courts, temples, palaces, long causeways, observatories, hidden chambers for ceremonies that likely involved incense, chanting, and priests doing interpretive dance before it was cool. The Maya world was vibrant, loud in a ceremonial way, crowded, deeply religious, and constantly performing rituals that ranged from mildly uncomfortable to this seems like a health hazard. This was a civilization not fading quietly into the night. This was a civilization in full bloom. Which, of course, brings us to the question, why did it all fall apart? But we're not rushing there yet. This is a sleepy documentary, not a thriller. Let's float there slowly, like a canoe drifting down a swampy river where nothing exciting ever happens. But the air smells weirdly comforting. By the 8th and 9th centuries, something subtle was happening. Not dramatic, not explosive, just inconvenient. The kind of problems you ignore because dealing with them sounds exhausting. The Maya population was booming. Cities were at their biggest. Monument building was in overdrive. Kings were commissioning stelae with the same energy as someone ordering new motivational posters during a midlife crisis. But under the surface, things were getting dense. Literally. More people meant more farming meant more deforestation, less forest meant less moisture retention meant less rain, and less rain meant that everyone started looking at the sky like, hello, water, please. Now, the Maya had dealt with droughts before, but this time the droughts were more frequent and longer, like nature was slowly turning off the faucet just to see what happens. But climate wasn't the only issue. Political overload. Kings were getting intense. You know how sometimes leaders double down on bad decisions instead of admitting the world is falling apart? Yeah, classic Maya rulers practically invented that move. Instead of saying, maybe we should relax on monument building and focus on water management, they said, actually, let's build more monuments and fight more wars. Surely that will fix the drought. Spoiler, it didn't. Overcrowding.
Some Maya cities were basically ancient megacities. Over 60,000 people in places like Tikal, all trying to survive in an environment that was never meant for that level of human ambition. Imagine living in a rainforest with limited fresh water, declining farmland, rival armies periodically showing up, and your king insisting on yet another multi-day festival that required massive amounts of food and labor. It's the kind of logistical nightmare that would make modern city planners.
By around 800–900 CE, something began to happen. Or rather, many small things began to happen. And collapse, by the way, is a dramatic word. This wasn't a movie scene where a single event destroys everything. It was more like everyone slowly getting tired of living in a stressful jungle empire and deciding to leave town. City by city, temple by temple, court by court. One by one, they stopped carving monuments, stopped commissioning new temples, stopped having grand royal ceremonies. Then, they just left. They walked away from the cities they had spent centuries building. Not all at once, not with panic, more like a quiet mass exodus motivated by exhaustion, drought, political messiness, and the sense that the vibes were just off. And here's the thing. They didn't vanish. The Maya people still exist today. Millions of them, speaking Maya languages, maintaining traditions, and continuing a culture that never truly disappeared. It was the cities that went silent. What happened to the Maya? Well, imagine if everyone in New York City slowly decided to go live in upstate farming villages instead, because the city became too crowded, too expensive, the subway stopped working, and also the rain stopped falling for 20 years. That's basically what happened. But of course, some historians couldn't resist adding more dramatic theories, because nothing says fun academic paper like implying a civilization evaporated mysteriously in the night. And sure, the collapse is complicated, but it's also human, predictable even. Too many people, too little water, too many kings demanding too much labor, too many wars for prestige, and too much pressure on the land. Civilizations don't fall in fire and glory. They fall in paperwork, food shortages, and collective burnout. A quiet walk through abandoned cities. Picture this. It's around 900 CE. You walk through the rainforest at dusk. The air is heavy. Cicadas buzzing, leaves dripping from a recent rain, one of the last for a while. You come across Tikal, once the powerhouse of the lowlands. Now, quiet. Temples still stand, but no smoke rises from hearths. No torches flicker. The plazas are empty. The stelae still speak in carved stone, but no one is listening. Maybe a few families remained for a while. Maybe a few priests tried to hold on, but eventually, even they drifted away. The rainforest began reclaiming everything with the passive-aggressive persistence of nature, roots pushing through palace floors, vines climbing over stairways, howler monkeys claiming the rooftops like self-appointed security guards. And all the while, the knowledge, the writing, the astronomy, the rituals, floated away too. Not because the people vanished, but because writing was tied to royal court life. When the courts dissolved, so did the scribes. So did the libraries. It was less a disappearance and more a dimming of lights across a vast cultural landscape. And so, what actually happened? If we had to wrap the reasons into a neat little sleepy bundle: environmental stress, overpopulation, drought cycles, deforestation, political fragmentation, warfare, elites being a little too extra. No single catastrophe, just centuries of slow-motion unsustainability, which is very human. Let's float to another angle. Before we drift into part 2, here's a calming thought. The Maya didn't disappear. Their cities did. The people continued. They adapted.
They moved north into places like Chichen Itza. They formed new kingdoms, new stories, new rhythms of life. The rainforest swallowed their old monuments with gentle inevitability, like a soft blanket covering a tired civilization that finally lay down to sleep. The lights should be dimmed by now. Your tea is probably cold, and the jungle we're wandering through is getting denser, thicker, and a little more dramatic, but in a very calm, whispery way. Tonight, we're floating deeper into the classic Maya world, where kings wore more feathers than common sense. Dynasties rose and fell with the predictable drama of a high school group chat, and political decisions were made by people who genuinely believed they were channeling cosmic serpents during rituals. So let's take a slow breath and step quietly inside a Maya court. A slow walk through a Maya palace. Picture a Maya palace, not a glittering ballroom or marble column fantasy. Maya palaces were more like elaborate stone compounds with courtyards, shady rooms, and a layout that felt like a puzzle someone forgot to finish. You'd enter through arched corridors, hear distant chanting, smell incense burning, always too much incense. Walk past scribes bending over bark paper books, and somewhere a royal family member is arguing about whose lineage glyphs deserve to be carved on the next monument. Maya courts were busy, but not loud. Everything happened with ritual seriousness, as if every daily task required a mystical explanation. Even drinking chocolate, and yes, Maya royalty absolutely drank chocolate, was a ceremonial event. Thick, bitter froth chocolate poured from one jar to another to make a foam that looked fancy, but tasted like a punishment. Still, it made the kings feel powerful. And when you rule a rainforest city where water barely cooperates, you take your luxuries where you can. Let's float into the dynastic drama. To understand why the Maya cities eventually unraveled, we need to look at their rulers. Because the kings of the classic Maya world had one major flaw. They took their jobs seriously. Way too seriously. These kings weren't just political leaders. They were considered divine intermediaries, walking, talking GPS signals between the people and the gods. And they acted like it. This meant every royal decision had to be wrapped in cosmic symbolism, bloodletting, and occasionally dressing up as mythical creatures to reenact creation stories. Great for culture, not so great for long-term stability. Let's drift through a few famous rulers. Tikal's kings, the ancient overachievers. We'll start with Tikal, partly because it's huge, and partly because their rulers left behind so many monuments that sometimes archaeologists debate whether they were documenting their reigns or just flexing. Tikal's kings had names like Yaks-eb-Shuak, Chak-Tok-Ishachak, Jaguar Paw, Ruler B, for when no one knew the name but felt obligated to call him something, and of course, Jasau Chankawil I, the celebrity king who revived Tikal's fortunes. These rulers loved carving stele. They loved showing themselves holding fancy scepters. They loved telling the world how many rituals they performed, which battles they won, and which gods apparently approved of their leadership. But underneath all that stone-carved confidence, Tikal was constantly stressed. Why? Because they had a long-standing enemy. Think of Calakmul as Tikal's dramatic rival, the kind that sends passive-aggressive invitations to peace ceremonies while planning a war on the side. Calakmul also had ambitious rulers, Uknumchin II, often called the Snake Lord, which tells you everything you need to know. Uknum Yichak Kak, whose name translates roughly to Fire's Claw, which also sounds like a 2000s metal band, and other kings who enjoyed flexing their snake dynasty symbols everywhere they could. Calakmul and Tikal spent centuries fighting each other, not constantly, just enough to keep the tension alive. Sometimes they'd go decades without direct conflict. Other times they'd go full soap opera and drag every allied city into their drama. The result? A political landscape so fragile that one big drought or one badly timed war could push everything off balance. And the kings, instead of calming things down, often escalated. Because nothing says stability like staging ritual battles.
Now picture drifting north to Palenque, a city tucked into the misty Chiapas rainforest. Palenque wasn't as big as Tikal or Calakmul, but it had style, elegant temples, beautiful inscriptions, and rulers who liked to remind everyone that they were descended from divine ancestors, whether or not the genealogies made sense. The most famous ruler was Kinich Yanab Pakal, also known as Pakal the Great, a king who ascended the throne as a child and ruled for nearly 70 years. His sarcophagus lid is iconic. His architecture is beautiful, and his inscriptions are basically a long autobiography that says, "I did everything. You're welcome." But even Pakal, the golden boy of Palenque, had to navigate rivalries, alliances, drought cycles, and neighbors who sometimes took tribute collection a little too seriously. Royal life wasn't glamorous. It was stressful, ceremonial, and full of obligations the gods apparently insisted on. Which brings us to one of the strangest aspects of Maya royal culture. If you walked into a classic Maya royal ceremony, there's a good chance you'd see rulers performing bloodletting, ritually, as if this were a normal Friday afternoon. The methods varied: piercing ears, piercing tongues, piercing other body parts I will gently avoid mentioning, using stingray spines, which, ouch, collecting the blood on bark paper, then burning it to send the essence upward as a message to the gods. This practice was believed to keep the universe running smoothly, great for cosmic harmony, potentially terrible for immune systems. And imagine doing that during a drought, when your body's already stressed and your people are hungry. Not ideal. But kings insisted on performing these rituals because if they stopped, it would look like the gods weren't listening. And if the gods weren't listening, the people might start asking if the dynasty had lost its divine spark. So royals kept cutting themselves, kept burning the paper, kept reassuring everyone that the gods were still paying attention. Meanwhile, actual political issues quietly simmered. A lot of Maya warfare wasn't about conquering territory. It wasn't about burning cities or wiping out populations. It was prestige warfare, symbolic warfare. The gods said we need to slap our neighbors to maintain cosmic balance warfare. Victories were recorded in meticulous detail. Defeats were carved in very vague phrases like, "the gods were displeased," which is historian speak for, "we lost spectacularly and don't want to talk about it." But even symbolic warfare has consequences. Every war required food, resources, and labor. Every captured noble needed to be ransomed or ritually executed, both expensive options. Every battle disrupted trade, farming, and local water management. It was a slow erosion, not dramatic, not apocalyptic, just draining. And as cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, and Karakal thought for centuries, their systems strained. Picture a huge, complex machine slowly wearing down, the gears grinding a little more each year. One of the most overlooked causes of Maya decline is monument building. Yes, monuments. Kings loved them. They commissioned stelae the way modern influencers commission professional photo shoots. Every major event required a new stone carving. Birth? Carve a stela. Accession? Carve a bigger stela. Ritual victory? Carve a stela with extra dramatic posture. And monuments weren't simple. They required quarrying stone, transporting it across jungle terrain, sculpting extremely detailed glyphs, and finishing everything on a cosmic schedule tied to the Maya calendar.
This demanded enormous labor. And when cities were at their peak populations around 700 or 800 CE, kings ramped up monument creation to absurd levels. It became an arms race of stone, everyone trying to outdo everyone else. And the workers? Probably exhausted. Combine that with droughts, crop stress, and political conflict, and the burden became unsustainable. By the late 700s, the warning signs were growing. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a slow leak you ignore because you hope it will go away. Cities in the southern lowlands started showing cracks. Monument dates stop increasing. Archaeologists noticed something subtle. Stelae from major cities suddenly stop being dated after certain years. It's like kings just stopped commissioning them, or didn't have the resources, or the scribes left, or the city was getting emptier. You can read the silence through the stone. Construction slows. Temples became less elaborate. Public buildings were smaller. Some structures were built sloppily, clearly rushed. When a civilization starts cutting corners on its architecture, something is wrong. Burials change. Elite burials get simpler. Grave goods become fewer. Not because beliefs changed, but because resources did. Ceremonial life declines. Bloodletting scenes vanish from art. Royal rituals become rare. Dynasties end without successors. It wasn't one collapse. It was dozens. Like lights turning off across a landscape, one by one. Let's drift for a moment into Copan, deep in the hills of Honduras. Copan was known for its beautiful sculptures, some of the best in the Maya world. But late in its history, Copan hit a crisis so severe that it left archaeologists puzzled for years. During the reign of Yaxpasa Chan Yopat, a king who inherited a city already in trouble, Copan's population began collapsing. One study showed massive environmental strain. Deforestation, soil erosion, and agricultural fields pushed beyond their limits. The king tried building grand monuments to restore confidence. But monuments don't fix hunger, or drought, or political instability. By the early 800s, Copan was essentially empty. It didn't collapse in a blaze. It quietly starved. A gentle, sad ending for a once great capital. Caracal, a powerful city in modern Belize, was once large enough to rival Tikal. But it too suffered from overfarming, water shortages, long-term warfare, and elite rivalry. The city became so sprawling that simply getting food to the center became a logistical challenge. And by the end, even Caracal's reservoirs, massive engineering achievements, started running dry. You can imagine the last priests standing by the drying water basins, desperately hoping the rains would return. They didn't. Not enough, anyway. Caracal dimmed, then emptied, then vanished into silence. Across all these cities, one theme emerges softly, like a whisper rising out of the ruins. The rulers were trying too hard. They kept performing huge rituals, demanding labor, starting wars, building monuments, announcing cosmic victories, competing with rival cities, maintaining huge courts, and consuming resources at elite levels even when the land could no longer support those lifestyles. The people didn't revolt dramatically. They didn't burn the palaces. They didn't storm the temples. They just left. Walked away. Like someone closing a laptop after a long, unproductive meeting. And once the court dissolved, everything else dissolved with it. A soft glide toward the northern shift. Meanwhile, life didn't end for the Maya. It migrated. As the southern lowlands struggled, northern cities like Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan rose in influence. People moved northward, toward areas with more reliable water, stronger trade routes, and fewer environmental constraints. The Maya world didn't collapse. It shifted its weight. But that's a story we'll float into next time. For now, just let the image settle in your mind. A vast rainforest, silent temples, overgrown courtyards, stone monuments fading under moss, the air buzzing softly with insects, a civilization not dead, but quietly stepped